to a Hope 1032 podcast.
As followers of Jesus, in whom all things were made, we acknowledge the Darug people as the traditional custodians of the country of where this podcast is recorded. We acknowledge their continuing connection to the land and waters, and thank them for protecting this land and its ecosystems since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and we extend that respect to all First Nations peoples listening today.
Hope Book Club with Georgia and Simone. Because life's just better with a book.
Hi, I'm Georgia.
And I'm Simone.
And welcome to episode 63 of the Hope Book Club podcast, where we chat about books from a hope-filled Christian lens, and we hope it makes you laugh, makes you think, and most of all, makes you read. This episode, we are reviewing this brilliant book from Indigenous author Larissa Behrendt called After Story. It has had much critical acclaim over the last 2 years since it was published in 2021, and so excited to share our thoughts on it today. Larissa is a Yuwalarai and Gamilaroi woman and an award-winning author and filmmaker. If that's not enough, she's also a lawyer and an academic at the University of Technology in Sydney. She was awarded the 2009 NAIDOC Person of the Year and 2011 New South Wales Australian of the Year. She's also been awarded an Order of Australia for her work in Indigenous education, the law and the arts in 2020. She received the Human Rights Medal in 2021 from the Australian Human Rights Commission. She's also the host of Speaking Out, a program on ABC Radio. Basically, an incredible woman. This is like only half of the stuff she's done. I couldn't even fit it all in.
I know, incredible, right?
All right, Sim, now for the book synopsis, please.
So After Story sort of follows when an Indigenous lawyer, Jasmine, decides to take her mother, Della, on a tour of England's most revered literary sites. Jasmine hopes it'll bring them closer together and help them reconcile the past. 25 years earlier, the disappearance of Jasmine's older sister devastated their tight-knit community, and this tragedy kind of returns to haunt Jasmine and Della when another child mysteriously goes missing during the tour. As Jasmine immerses herself in the world of her literary idols, including Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters, and Virginia Woolf, Della is inspired to rediscover the wisdom of her own culture and storytelling. But sometimes the stories that are not told can become too great to bear.
All right, Sim, let's get straight into the positives. What did you like or love about this book?
So I loved the fact that they kind of had to go to the other side of the world to start reconciliation with each other. And like for me, you know, they kind of had to take themselves out of that situation and that, you know, the day-to-day and what they've always sort of known to start to reconnect. And for me, I know something really resonated with that. And I think, yeah, I loved the fact that, you know, she pushed through. Jasmine didn't just give up when there were a few little hurdles of her getting to go on this tour and then taking her mother. She pushed through, and the result of that was great.
I love so many things about this book. This is one of my favorites of the year. I keep saying that. I keep saying, like, every book we review, this is my new favorite of the year. This is my new favorite of the year. Genuinely, this is in my top 3 books that I've read this year. I loved it. Della and Jasmine's mother-daughter relationship is so special to me. I love reading about mother-daughter relationships in books, especially when they're written by women. I just think it is just... This relationship was written with so much nuance and so much subtlety almost that you wouldn't even pick up sometimes. Like Larissa didn't have to explicitly say what the other was thinking. There was just these little idiosyncrasies, these little nuances that were just so unique to a mother-daughter relationship. I really loved the portrayal of Frog Hollow, the town in which they lived, this rural Australian country town. And I think being from Sydney, don't have a lot of experience of what a country town is like, especially one with a high Indigenous population. So I think in the current climate where there is just so much talk about, the Voice referendum, and this is in front of mind for so many people, I think having a real authentic Indigenous voice in Larissa Behrendt portraying what is quite an authentic rural Aussie Indigenous experience was really special to me and actually taught me a lot about Indigenous Australia. I loved the literary tour of England. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. The characters in that, the tour guide, the other characters are from all over the world on the tour. So much fun. And especially if you're a lover of books, you'll just love all of the, the houses they got to go to of these famous authors. That was really cool. But I think for me, because the perspective shifted every chapter between Della and Jasmine, the mother and daughter, Della's perspective was really special to me. I loved her matter-of-factness, her brashness almost, her very Australian way of dealing with things. And she had just little pockets of wisdom. And I just wanted to, everything she said, I'm like, oh, I just want to remember that. It's so, you almost wouldn't think that she had a lot of wisdom to share in the way that she thought about herself, in the way that Jasmine even saw her mother. But she did. She has this amazing cultural knowledge. And I thought that was really portrayed quite well.
I agreed. All of those things were amazing.
Now, the book is told, like I said, in two distinct narratives with alternate chapters. How did you find that narrative choice, Sim? Did you find that you related to one perspective more? How do you think it affected the story?
Yeah, look, I'm going to be honest and say it's kind of my favorite style. It's my favorite narrative, style to read. So I absolutely loved that. And for me, it did make a big difference because I found I related so much more to Jasmine. And so I found at times being able to actually hear and see Della's perspective really helped me kind of actually balance things out and not necessarily see things too much from Jasmine's perspective. I think if it was all told from her, it would be very easy for me to just completely relate to her and not understand at all sort of at times where Della was coming from. But being able to actually hear her perspective was kind of like a bit of a check for me at times, and I loved that.
Yeah, for sure. I loved also the way, it didn't always do this, but sometimes it would go back and retell the same day from the perspective. So, you hear Jasmine's perspective, then you hear Della's perspective, the exact same events, and the experiences of what even... they are experiencing quite literally the same thing. They were in the same places. They were interacting with each other, but the thoughts, the context, everything that I guess influenced that for each character was so different. So that was really, really interesting for me. For example, something that would annoy Jasmine about Della wouldn't even notice. It would not even be on her radar of things to notice. So I think that was just really good in getting that understanding, like you said, of where the other party's coming from. We get to understand both Jasmine and Della a little bit better. And as they go on a journey throughout the book of coming to that place of reconciliation and mutual understanding with each other, that was really special.
It kind of reminds me of that thing of when people say, something that might be so massive in your mind from a moment was just somebody else's Tuesday. And it's so true because we interact with the world with so many different things at play. It's why, true neutrality can never really fully exist.
Larissa Behrendt, as the author, just does touch on some very intense themes, painful issues, obviously with the disappearance of Della's child, Jasmine's sister. But it's done with a refreshing amount of humour and lightheartedness, which is sometimes a balance that is so hard to get right. But I think she did a really good job here. Do you think that those moments helped you to understand better the experiences of both Jasmine and Della?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of that's done through sort of a lot of those funny characters and the quirky things that are happening around them. And it actually, for me, just reminded me that as people, we don't exist in a vacuum, right? We might be going through something massive ourselves, but we're not existing in that without other people around living their own lives, living their own experiences, having their own quirky ways about them. And so for me, it really brought home a realness to it, being able to kind of take yourself out of those deep kind of difficult moments and be like, yeah, they're deep and they're difficult and you can see them going through and dealing with it, but all that humor, all of that other things around it, you're like, that's so real. It felt and it painted such a vivid picture for me. And I think sometimes that is lost when authors are delving into deep stuff. They focus so much on just that trauma or that moment or those feelings without remembering that when you go through that, you still have life happening around you and you still interact with the life that is happening around you as well. And so, yeah, I kind of loved that. How about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that their trauma wasn't necessarily exclusively talked about. And I think that's because the major event, right, the disappearance of Brittany, it had happened 25, 30 years before. So what the trauma was removed in a way. Like Jasmine, says she doesn't really remember her sister. She was 3 when she disappeared. And I think when you've got a major trauma event like that, like you said, you move through, you keep going. Della had 2 other children that she had to, and there was this line in the book that Della's sister basically, she broke down, and Della's like, well, Della's sister basically said, you have to get up and you have to be a mother because you still have 2 young girls that are relying on you. And I think just that reality check, I think, for Della really kind of pushed her back into living. But I also do wonder then if that was at a detriment. It wasn't talked about. It was pushed down. There wasn't that room to process and grieve. And then you see 25, 30 years later, Della and Jasmine and the whole extended family and community of Frog Hollow is still dealing with the fallout of this traumatic event. So I think it certainly made room for lightness. I wonder, even 25 years later, how much of that lightness was a cover for trauma that was still happening and hadn't been processed. It made me feel uneasy at times, I will admit, because I'm like, I don't know. But I think that's realistic, right? Because that's the way that trauma affects people.
To say that, yeah, it wasn't necessarily dealt with exactly right, but it was real.
Yes.
And that's what I loved about it. Mm-hmm. It was so real.
And I think it allowed the story, the actual novel, to keep going at a good pace. I think if we all had to, Della and Jasmine especially, had to deal with that trauma all at once, everything would have unraveled and the actual plot would have stopped. So I think it was also critical for the book.
Book, but also for life, because when you do try and deal with it all at once like that, it becomes almost like trauma impact, like on top of trauma.
Yes.
And so that's what I loved about it, was this like realness, but also this unpacking that wasn't so intense that it sort of like created more issues and dramas.
For sure. Now, this is obviously a fiercely Australian story. We've got 2 strong Indigenous women who are the main characters, particularly obviously in its portrayal of that Indigenous culture and history. But it's set, the majority of it is set thousands of kilometres away in England. What did you take away from this comparison of cultures and history?
I loved the juxtaposition of everything. Like that to me, it was just really powerful. It was brilliantly done. I feel like the way that she was able to kind of so subtly link kind of things and say something without being so explicitly saying it. There were so many moments where you could see these links and these things that are there, that you like in your head, and like that there are those links and those juxtapositions, and that how much just generally, obviously, like England being such a powerful thing of like colonization and how that has impacted. But I found that I kind of loved the way that she could then show that without having to be like constantly saying it. Mm-hmm. I think this is a book of subtlety.
Yes.
And that for me was so powerful, because it's almost like she kind of lays it out in front of you and you're left like just seeing it rather than being told it.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of this one moment where they go and visit the British Museum and the guy is asking for donations, and Della basically is like, oh, we've already paid, and walks through. They hadn't paid a donation, but she was saying that they'd already paid because the British Museum has stolen Indigenous bodies, Indigenous artefacts, which are quite literally still there. And those subtle hints, it really makes you think, and it's like, Larissa, you've done it again. It's so, so good. I also love, just like you said, the disruption of the status quo, having Della and Jasmine on this kind of uptight English literary trip, and you had these other characters, this professor of literature and these kind of hoity-toity sisters from Boston. And then you have just Della come in and just kind of says what she sees and says what she thinks. And that ruffles a few feathers, and I loved that because I think that it's so important. I think that there was this whole juxtaposition of written storytelling and how well known these novels are and Shakespeare and these literary tours, and Della's basically saying, well, Indigenous culture has 60,000 years of history as well, and oral storytelling, and this has been passed down. Why doesn't the world know about it? Is it any less important? And I think those lessons, that comparison was really cool for me as well. Kept me thinking, kept me on my toes.
Absolutely.
All right, finally, Sim, did you have a favourite character, line, moment that you could sum up?
For me, the moment actually was the one you just talked about.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. But yeah, for me, like my favorite moment was that when she walked through and was like, we've already paid. And I felt that was just so powerful. Like I loved that moment. I think it was also a moment for her to claim that and also just to be like, no, like this is part of my experience. This is part of what we've gone through. I think there was an important part of that as well there. And then we've already paid. I mean, that sums it up, doesn't it? And, so for me, that was sort of like the standout moment, but it's hard to tell. There were just so many great moments.
I know. And for me, I think another standout moment was from Della. And it's mainly just because she has so many quotable things. But they were talking about Shakespeare, I think, visiting one of his, visiting Stratford upon Avon where he lived. And they were talking about Shakespeare making up all these words and that he was the inventor of, thousands of words in the English dictionary, etc. And she says, it's all very clever, but when I get a word wrong or say a phrase that hasn't been said before that I think means the right thing and it's different, it's seen as a mistake, not a new thing. Maybe that's the difference between when you write something down and lots of people read it and when you just say it and it goes into the air. And I think that really summed it up for me. It's like, what constitutes history and what constitutes storytelling? And is it just because, England was such a powerful country and so well connected that these works have been able to, go out among thousands of years? Is that, the only thing?
I think it's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
Personally, but it is that moment of going, just again, it reminds me of like the history is written by the victors, and that whole thing of like, because it's written down, it's written from perspectives. Like I said, there's no neutrality. Everyone has their own perspectives and their own experiences, and often the voices that are heard the loudest are the ones that yell the loudest.
Quite literally.
Or who have that way of being able to write it down and get it across and spread it through the entire world. That's not, the way that happened. Not great.
No.
At all. But that is sort of, part of the thing is that, literary wise, we have to be acknowledging that. And I think as readers, as people who say that we love reading, that's something we need to be looking at is, what are we reading? Who are we reading? Why are we reading what we're reading? Yeah,
we need to definitely have a critical lens. And I think that Larissa was able to provide that in that book, just getting us to be able to think a little bit more. All right, that just about sums up our review on the book. But we do have some comments from the wonderful Katrina Rowe. You may remember her as the former host of the Hope Book Club. She absolutely loved this book. Here's a little bit of what she said. She said, I loved After Story and found it deeply moving. Leaving home to travel overseas was such a clever way to highlight many of the issues facing contemporary Indigenous Australians. There is nothing like travel to put your own life and problems in perspective. Being away from home forces Della and Jasmine to re-examine their lives, their choices, and most importantly, their relationship. She says, for me, Della's journey was the most important, enjoyable part of this story as she learns to distinguish between what she is and isn't responsible for and realises that although she isn't book smart like Jasmine, she has valuable cultural knowledge to pass on. It's the growth in Della that elevates this book from being just a good read to a truly satisfying one. She says, I reckon everyone should read this book before they vote in the Voice referendum because it's a really easy way to listen to an authentic Indigenous voice. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
We'd also love to take this opportunity to highlight some incredible First Nations books and authors that we have here in Australia. If you prefer non-fiction, here is a suggestion from Susanna McFarlane, who is the head of publishing for Bible Society in Australia, on her favourite read of the year so far.
The best book I've read this year is actually written by someone who I don't think is a Christian, called Amy Thunig, and it's Tell Me Again. And I just was poleaxed by it. It's so beautiful. And it doesn't tell you about it, shows you this beautiful circular poetry of Indigenous storytelling. And it is a book. So she had a terrible childhood, and her parents were both heroin addicts. And she writes a story where simultaneously she said they were the worst parents ever, and I love them totally. So if you want an exercise in forgiveness, it's like almost unconscious forgiveness. It's not denial. Like, she totally looks at them and goes, it's terrible. And she wrote this beautiful book, and includes one story where her mum realized she was loving wild animals. So she takes her to the zoo and she sees a tiger, and she's using that as an example of her parents totally supporting her and feeding her curiosity. The same trip to the zoo, both parents OD'd and had to be taken by ambulance. And that she could tell that story with love. And then I went to watch her listen, because I was like total fangirl by this point. And she talks about how someone came up and said, "Oh, what a beautiful book. How sad you're not in a relationship with your parents." And she said, "Oh, but I am. I love them. My mum has read the book." So it's just infused with grace, whether she's a Christian or not, I don't know. And it's the most beautifully told story.
That one is Tell Me Again by Amy Thunig, if you want to put it on your TBR. And if you are looking to expand that repertoire and read more books by Indigenous authors, that's definitely something that I am aiming to do. There are some great resources out there. There is one page I really like called Blackfella Book Club, who have some great suggestions. They do a monthly book club. They're on Facebook and Instagram, and we'll link those in the show notes. We would also love for you to be a part of this community. If this is your first time listening, welcome. So glad you're here. You can be a part of the Hope Book Club Facebook group for more conversation, and also to find out what book we'll be reviewing next. We'd also love this podcast to reach more people. The way you can do that is to rate, subscribe, share it with your bookish friends. Until then, stay reading. Sim, I believe you've got a quote to end on.
I do, from Australian author Charlotte Wood. Bookshops are like the safety vaults for seeds of our country's cultural and intellectual life.
Perfect. You always find the perfect quotes.
Thank you.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.